Saga of the Red Crane, Weird World 1. Saku gazed out into the darkness where anything could be lurking. Nothing moved in the abandoned amusement park where strange, distorted animal-like statues stood frozen in time. Underneath the great warrior, Maurice stirred restlessly. "Please tell me we aren't going in there," he neighed, and she quickly understood. They had tracked several Black Serpent disciples to this strange realm of rusting rides and collapsing circus tents. She had collected 6 scrolls from her victims with secrets about this dimension, and she was sure her enemy possessed knowledge that could help her return home. On one of the scrolls, Saku had read about the City of 9 Columns, hidden deep within the bowels of the Black Serpent, where souls and realms were discarded and left to wither away. She had read that within the city there was a device that could open a doorway back home. She just needed to find a way into the so-called bowels of the nightmare, and she was sure one of the disciples she was hunting had the knowledge she needed. A sudden explosion of laughter startled her. The sound came from within the amusement park. "I guess we're going in," Maurice neighed. Saku didn't answer, but she tugged on Maurice's mane to signal him forward. With a snicker of resignation, Maurice marched past a sign that read, "Weird World," and entered the park. Saga of the Red Crane, Weird World 2. Through clouds of thickening black fog, Saku guided Maurice to a collapsing purple and yellow pavilion, surrounded by rusted mechanized creatures twice her size, like ogres pulled out of a dark bedtime story. The grimness and desolation of the park played heavy on her heart. Hearing a sudden clatter, Saku quickly dismounted and stealthily made her way to the doorway, where she saw 3 Black Serpent disciples assembling some sort of instrument. Saku stepped back, slowly withdrawing her katana, keeping a close eye on her enemy. Then, sensing before seeing, she ducked as a gleaming blade whistled over her head. An instant later, she sprang away like a spring uncoiled as she watched Maurice ram her assailant to the ground and trample his head to a bloody pulp. But before she could thank him, she heard the click of a rifle. She turned around and found herself surrounded by 3 disciples. There was a long silence. Then one of them screamed like the end of the world and squeezed the trigger. Suddenly, bullets whistled beside her and above her like angry hornets as she pushed forward, ducking, dodging, and slicing her assailants to ribbons. When it was all over, she was standing in a pool of guts, blood, and twitching severed limbs. She edged close to a mangled torso to search for one of their scrolls, but stopped when she heard another click. Saku turned to face a disciple stepping out of the shadows. She gripped her katana, but before she had time to lunge, he squeezed the trigger. Saga of the Red Crane, Weird World 3. With a desperate neigh, Maurice thoughtlessly leapt in front of Saku, taking the biting bullet in his side and collapsing to the ground. Just as the disciple attempted to squeeze off another round, a sudden booming robotic laugh startled him, and before he understood what was what, a massive mallet came crashing over his head, sending a splatter of gore in all directions. Staggering backward, Saku raised her gaze to a giant mechanical ogre as he lifted his mallet high over his head and prepared to smash her to oblivion. "Get on fast!" Maurice neighed as he clambered to his feet. Saku didn't need to be told twice. Instantly, she leapt on Maurice's back in one fluid movement. Within moments, they were racing away, with an incomprehensible horror giving chase. Despite the pain, Maurice bolted through the gloom with the massive mallet crashing behind him, shaking the ground like an earthquake. Tales from the Horror, Through the Void Darkly. 1. Mahan pushed through the rupture and entered the endless vastness that was the void. He stood, frozen, unable to think or move, as the rest of the ragtag squad pushed through the fog. Dwayne released a startled gasp as he came up beside Derek and Mel, and he pointed, mouth agape, toward a rolling desert of putrefied bodies soaking in an endless stew of scintillating blue energy. Forgotten memories, dragged up from the blue sea like feverish ghosts and ghouls, and then disappeared in a swirl of fog. Screams, shrieks, sobs, and maniacal laughter overwhelmed them. Heads, limbs, and bodies fell from the dark sky, crashing over piles of bones and rubble, shaking the world as though the horror itself took everything dark and vile in existence and shook it in a mixing bag. Jaden steadied himself for a moment, then stepped up to Mahan. "You think it's here?" Mahan scanned the endless ruins. "I don't know," he answered flatly. The rank odor of rotting bodies and mold invaded his nostrils. "What I do know is we can't stand in one place for too long, or dark memories will drag us down in a pit of madness," Haley interrupted. "Memories so vivid, you'd think they were your own." "Memories of horrors past," Mahan confirmed, staring at the residual memory of an executioner raising his axe over his head and suddenly lopping off the head of a panicking prisoner. The head rolled over a ground strewn with bodies in various forms of dismemberment, and then the entire memory, the executioner and the dead prisoner, dissipated into the swelling blue like a midnight sea. This was the void, and it was far worse than anything Mahan had read about in the scroll he had scavenged off the dead samurai. "If the memories don't get you, the creatures will." "What creatures?" Max asked, shoving his way past Sam and Eric, who stared in shock at the countless memories materializing and dematerializing before them. "What are we talking about here?" "Whatever horror you can imagine," Haley answered. "This place, it's a cosmic dump of all things horrific and terrible, and, from what we've been able to gather, our only hope." Surin approached Mahan, crunching brittle bones with every step. He stopped at the top of a small mound of rubble and looked back at Haley. "Can you do your thing here?" "I don't think she'd want to," Grace said in a low, breathy voice, pushing out of the rupture through a curtain of fog. Haley nodded. "Mrs. Sherwood's right. I could lose myself in these endless memories." A bone suddenly crunched behind her. Haley turned to watch Claudine kneel by a cluster of glowing purple and pink flowers, pushing out of a mound of death and decay. Taking caution, Claudine pulled out her scissors and quickly clipped a sample, adding the strange flowers to her backpack, where she kept a collection of flora samples plucked from various realms in the horror. The squad stood in silence for a long while as they absorbed this new part of the horror. "We should move," Mahan said at last, and he took a small, cautious step forward as he watched the residual memory of a soldier form and rush toward a strange object. Mahan narrowed his gaze. It took him a moment to work out what he was seeing as the soldier stepped on a mine and exploded into a shower of gore and blood. There, in the distance, he thought he saw an old World War I fortress tank. One of the many ridiculous tanks he had seen in a history book. He remembered reading about the fortress tank and laughing at the absurdity of it. He remembered reading that the tank had been designed, but never actually built. Not in his world, anyway. What Mahan knew and what he had learned in this world didn't really matter much. Not anymore. The tank could provide shelter and protection if its huge caterpillar track somehow, by some cosmic miracle, worked. Maybe the tank could provide refuge, just like the ruined tower had long ago. Maybe, like the tower, he would find other survivors there, eking out some kind of existence. In the end, Mahan didn't know what he would find. All he knew is he needed to get his squad out of this sea of dark memories and into that fortress. And so Mahan signaled for attention with his rifle, said a few encouraging words, and led the squad toward the most absurd tank he had ever seen in his life.